Hiya. Ed here from Crystal Clear Aquatics, and I'm quite excited because this afternoon I am doing a Ponds Revisited. I'm doing a little bit of work on a pond that I installed about 10 months ago, one of the bigger ones to date. It was a fantastic project to document, great fun to build, and one of those jobs where it really needs a good season or two to establish before it starts to look its best. So this is the first time I've come back and been able to see the plants that we put in last year and see how they're doing. So I shall proudly present to you. Now if you haven't seen the video, it's a 4-parter. Pond reline and restoration, I think it is. I'll try and put the link in one of the comments below. It was a wonderful job to do last year. There was a pond here initially, and the pond liner had finally given up the ghost. It was 25 plus years old, lots of holes and tears, and the wildlife had finally come along and finished it off. So in the process of relining the pond, it was a good opportunity to kind of redesign it and do a few tweaks. Now the main issue with the pond originally was that it's just a very deep hole, and it didn't really have anywhere for pond plants. It was a bit too deep for most water lilies, and there wasn't really any marginal shelving for any peripheral marginal plants. So in the process of relining the pond, we were able to incorporate some proper planting zones, and it was really this that I wanted to come back and to see how the plants have established since they were put in. The filtration is doing a fantastic job on this pond. I mean, when the sun comes out, beautiful kind of emerald green. It was never designed as a swim pond, perhaps it should have been, but I have to say that's as inviting, or if not more so, than any swimming pool I've ever seen. It was always themed around a wildlife pond. Very little livestock. In fact, we have introduced a few fish in there, and there are half a dozen sort of 3 to 4 inch golden rudd in there at the moment, which surprisingly I've been able to see. Despite a pond this sort of size, the little shoal are cruising around quite happily. So the leaf mould, the leaf litter at the bottom, not a problem. At the end of the season, when we come to do the autumn service, I'll end up dredging some of this and just sort of hooking out some of the leaves with a net. But actually a certain amount of leaf litter and sediment on the bottom is beneficial in a pond. Amphibians, frogs will be using it to overwinter. Newts like to rummage around in there as well, so we don't want to be too clean. It's still going to take another year or two for everything to really start to thicken out, but it's nice to see the plants that were put in, and it seems that everything that went in has survived. It would have been lovely to have come over a month or so ago when the irises were in flower. Sadly they finished all too quickly, but the pondateria, the pickerel plants here now, are just beginning to flower. It's nice to have a little bit of sort of end of season interest in the pond. The Carex and the Typha at the back there, Equisetum coming through, which will all create a lovely sort of backdrop and screen for the statue over here. Sally, I named her originally, and Sally she shall remain. Very little maintenance has had to be done on the pond. You can see the pumps at the bottom here. My client has not had to clean them out at all, or the fountain pump, which is great, and the filtration system is literally just ticking over. It's lovely to see in such clear water the lily stems themselves. I mean, in typical ponds, especially when it's sort of green or murky, all the interest with lilies are at the pads and the flowers at the surface. But having this depth of clarity and being able to see the stems of the lilies as well. Oh, there's the rudd. There we go. Just adds a little bit of extra interest. It's almost like looking into an aquarium. So again, I think a few more lilies in here to provide a little bit more surface cover, but also a bit more underwater interest. You know, lovely to see the fish swimming around and cruising around between the stems of the water lilies. And the cascade, something this pond was always crying out for. Such a perfect natural slope here for a fall like this. It's weathering in nicely and looking very nice. Such a natural, soothing sound. You just close your eyes for a minute. I try not to sound too much like one of these American well-being apps, but just close your eyes and have a listen to that sound. Gorgeous. Just some lovely little bits of moss that naturally started to accumulate on the spill stones. That some of that will need to be cleaned off because you don't want to raise the water level too much behind those spill stones. And the mind your own business that is planted is clung on. Hopefully that will start to spread and really take over. The grass growing in amongst all the cracks of the stonework has softened up this, and eventually the turf will start to grow over the top face of the stones. Lovely ripples and reflections on the surface. I think at night time this is a real picture of the pond lighting, and I will have to try and come back again now it's clear. You really see the lights at their best. So this is the Oasa Screenmatic 2 140,000. I won't go into too much detail with this, but essentially on this pond with minimal livestock, it's just ticking over. There's very little debris which is getting collected in the screen, and we're still not yet at the stage of overflow, so the filter foams haven't become so heavily soiled that the water level has crept up, fully submersing those foams and feeding over the overflow into the second chamber. So that's fantastic. Well, I didn't just come here to have a look at the pond, I am actually doing some work, so I'm going to get my equipment out now. Had a few treatments. As I say, no blanket answer because a late dose was added, but I will put some of the Oasa Duo Boost, very much like the Evolution Aqua Pond Bombs, and they're riddled with beneficial nitrifying bacteria, which although the pond isn't lacking in, it's good pond husbandry, and so I will add a couple of those to the pond, get the filtration system cleaned out, and do some deadheading on some of these plants. There's a lot of iris seed heads that need to be trimmed back, so I'll crack on and get that done. So I'm just going around deadheading the flower stems from these iris labiegata. The flowers on irises, as beautiful as they are, sadly are very short-lived, and they'll end up then maturing into these very heavy seed pods. Now it's not quite so bad on some of the smaller purple irises, but certainly the Iris pseudochorus, the yellow flag iris, these flower stems get incredibly tall and heavy and end up dragging down the plant and just look really unsightly. So at this time of year, once they've finished, it's a good idea just to trim them off and deadhead them. So if you wanted to try to propagate the iris, you could leave some of these flower stems to dry and the seeds will naturally scatter. When these have dried, inside here are some beautiful sort of neat rows. I wonder if we can open one of these up and see it already, of stacked seeds within the pod. But actually I find that the iris will propagate and grow vegetatively via its rhizomes. Oh, it's not quite fully established yet, but when these are ready and they've dried properly and you open it up, you get this beautiful neat line of iris seeds. And you could try and take some of these away and stick them into a shallow tray of some damp tissue or some earth which is damp and sow these, probably successfully. But I'm not too fussed about that over here. Now, growing marginal plants like this in these marginal zones, in these shallows filled with gravel, so much more natural than having plants in plastic baskets sort of balanced on shelves. And this is an area which has been retained with a submersed collar of stone and then backfilled with gravel, so all the plants can be planted bare rooted into this. And we've got sort of a maximum of 6 inches of water above the crown of the plant when the pond's at its fullest. And this is maximum height of the pond. There's a 4-inch overflow on here dealing with overflow, so this is always going to be the maximum height. And if the water level drops slightly, the marginals will be quite happy just with their feet in the water. So as for treatments in this pond, as I say, I'm not going to be using any blanket answer currently, but what I am going to use are a couple of these Awaza Duo Boost balls. Now, I'm a fan of things like this. I'm also a big fan of the Evolution Aqua Pond Bombs, which are fantastic. The Awaza Duo Ball, as the name suggests, kind of is a two-phase treatment. So the liquid within the pot contains millions of beneficial enzymes and nitrifying bacteria, which will help to convert ammonia into nitrate much faster. Fantastic if you are setting up a new pond or establishing a new filter and you want to give it a kickstart and a boost just to help to get it established and mature much faster. But the second phase of this is the ball itself, which is a gel ball which is filled with various trace elements and minerals which often are lacking in kind of enclosed pond systems like this. So again, this beautiful little thing here, which is rather attractive in its own right. You could do some sort of circus act with one of these, juggle 3 of them, they look very cool. Reminds me of the movie Labyrinth, actually. David Bowie with one of these, rolling them around in his hands. Anyway, this is filled with trace elements and minerals which will slowly dissolve into the pond and give it a boost. You can apply these directly into the pond, or you can add it to the filter. I'm going to be adding 2 of these. I mean, each one of these is for 20,000 litres. Technically, I need 4 of these, but the pond itself is well balanced already, so this is just giving it a beneficial, positive boost. So, I shall sling one in there. And the second one I'm going to add into the filter. Now, you do get this nice little bag which you can fill with a gel ball. In the Awaza filter, there's so many pockets and chambers where you can just drop this directly in that I'm not going to use that. For next year, I'm going to introduce a few more water lilies to the pond, which I think will be lovely to have some additional islands of foliage and some more flowers. We've got some pinks and some white. We don't seem to have any yellows, so it'd be nice to introduce some yellows into the pond as well, just for a bit of diversity. But I think I'd like to come back with my snorkel and get in there. I've already seen a little shoal of baby rudd, so the 6 adults that have been in here for the summer are obviously very happy and have had some babies, which is great. So that's something else to look out for in the pond. And it won't take long for the rudd to really start to populate and for a nice shoal to establish. So it would be lovely to get in there with the camera and snorkel and you know, have a root around in the pond. So I think that's what I'll do next year. But for the time being, it's been a real treat to come back and see this. I'm very fortunate that I get to come back on a lot of these jobs and really see how they're establishing and settling down. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Ed from Crystal Clear Aquatics, and I'll see you in the next pond. So I'm just going around deadheading these flower stems from the Iris labiata. I'm going to start that again. If you wanted to leave some to self-seed, you could perhaps try leaving 1 stem or 2 stems on the plant, but to be honest, I find that the iris will propagate vegetatively. Stupid fat hobbits.